Alright, hey BookTube, it's Mickey, and I'm here today to film my top reads of 2016. I have been trying to film this video for the past couple of weeks, and every time I try and do it, something goes wrong. I have to film later in the day because of the way that my schedule is currently set up, and I'm trying to use my rear-facing camera on my phone to film because that lens lets in more light, so the videos look better when there's not a lot of light outside. But I can't really see the shot as well as I would like to. Like, I can't really see what's on the screen right now. Like, I don't actually know exactly what's being recorded. And so a couple of times I've recorded this and then I look at it and like at the top of my head is like cut off. Or like something is just like wonky and messed up that I didn't realize it was until like halfway through the video. And then at one point, for some reason, the video would stop recording every 2 minutes. Anyways, but I'm going to do it. I am persevering. Hopefully this like 50th take is the best take. So last year I read a lot of books, and I'm just going to pick 10 books for you guys today. 8 of these books are my absolute favorite books that I read last year, and then 2 of them are honorable mentions. They're books that stuck with me. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were my favorites, but they're books that either stuck with me or books that I think are important. So I'm going to give you the books in no particular order, and I'm just going to start with number 10, which was Counter Narratives by John Keene. This is a collection of short stories, mostly historical fiction, looking at different moments in history from the point of view of people of color, mostly people of African descent. And I loved it. I thought it was really, really beautifully written, and I also think that it just did a really good job of sort of taking, like its title suggests, a different approach to historical figures and people and things and moments that we thought we knew about, and it would come and kind of take a different approach to these things in a way that I really, really liked. So for instance, it would talk about slavery, but instead of focusing on American slavery, which is what most texts about slavery tend to do, it focused on slavery in like Latin America, or it focused on slavery in Haiti. It looked at Langston Hughes, and it looked at Langston Hughes you hate Langston Hughes' sexuality, and the fact that he was, a lot of people knew him to be, that it was rumored that he was a closeted homosexual, and sort of like, so it just sort of looked at these different figures from different points of views, and I just like really, really liked it. I loved the voice of it. I thought it was beautifully written. The stories really engaged me. I think there was only one story in the whole collection, which is the first one, that I didn't really like, but the rest of it was really great. If you're a person who really, really likes language and poetic language, this is a piece for you. Keene is a poet, and you can kind of just see it in the way that he constructs sentences. Not to say that the book is hard to read, but it is definitely very literary at times, and I just thought it was a beautiful book. I did a review of it that I'll post somewhere in the annotations, but I definitely would suggest it. It was one of my favorite reads from last year. The next thing that I would suggest you guys read is Another Country by James Baldwin. I also did a review of that I'm going to link, where I did the best job I've ever done summarizing a book. I just thought that book was fantastic. It is a book about a group of people living in New York from different class backgrounds, racial backgrounds, different genders, different sexualities, and it sort of looks at the ways that racism and homophobia and classism and all of these things, how they affect how we view ourselves and how they affect how we interact with other people. And I thought that made the book is just again, beautifully written. James Baldwin has become like one of my favorite authors. I can genuinely say that. And I have a really hard time calling an author my favorite, but I think James Baldwin is definitely one of my favorite authors. I've yet to read anything by him that I like completely disliked. I was blown away by Another Country. So far, it's my favorite book by him that I've read, and it just approaches a lot of different topics. I did a review that I will link in the video so you guys can see more of my thoughts, because I could spend this whole video talking about another country. But if you have not yet read it and you're looking for a place to start with James Baldwin, I actually think Another Country could be a good place to go. The next book I want to talk about is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. This is Joan Didion's memoir about her experiences after her husband suddenly dies from a heart attack and her daughter is hospitalized for an illness, and she isn't 100% sure if her daughter is going to survive. And this memoir to me is just a great exploration to me of grief. It very closely resembles the way I imagine I would react to the situation. There were a lot of people who felt like this, that Didion is cold and distant in this memoir, but I don't think so. What you get to see in this book is Joan Didion is a doer. She's a fixer. She's the type of person who is very good at fixing problems. And so she goes about grief the same way she would go about any other problem. She's like, how do I solve it? She tries to find the rules surrounding grief. How do you grieve properly? And you kind of watch this character trying to figure out, the proper way to do this. And she realizes, of course, that there is no proper way to grieve. There is no right way to do it, no matter what you're going through. Like, it's unpredictable and it hurts. And there's no way to predict when you're going to feel a certain way, or how you are supposed to process certain things, how you'll think about things. Like, there's just no way to do it. It's an experience that you sort of just have to go through. I just really think I can see myself revisiting The Year of Magical Thinking later on in life. So the next book that I want to talk about is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is a book about a woman who chooses to stop eating meat after she starts having these violent, bloody dreams. And this sort of breaking of rule and tradition, because she's a Korean woman and she refuses to eat meat and she refuses to feed her husband meat. And this sort of breaking of like Korean tradition and the breaking of rules and sort of breaking of expectations of herself leads her to kind of have this sense of freedom that causes her to sort of give up a lot of other things. I think that this book does a really good job of just sort of looking at, like, what does it mean to be a human being, and is it possible to just exist in the world without having to have any of the responsibilities and the trappings that come with being human? Can we just exist without having to be somebody's husband or somebody's sister or somebody's daughter? Is that even possible? And I did a review of this book also, and I will link it somewhere in the video if you want to hear some more of my thoughts on that book. But that's a book that definitely has haunted me and stayed with me for a while, so I would highly recommend that one. The next book that I want to talk about is another James Baldwin book. It is The Fire Next Time. It is a collection of 2 essays. One, a letter to his nephew about how to live in this world as a black man, and then another is just it's an essay that sort of looks at like the high point of the essay for me was him, James Baldwin, meeting Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam. And it just sort of looks at and really goes into detail about black rage and what that looks like and what it is caused by, and how it has manifested itself. Primarily looking at the Nation of Islam and some of its tenets. And I just love both of those essays. I find myself referring to them and thinking about them on a regular basis. And I think that they should be like required reading for everyone. They're very short. Definitely really would recommend those. So The Fire Next Time is my next favorite book that I read last year. Next book that I read last year was actually a reread, and it's one of the reasons why I'm going to try and incorporate more rereads in my reading this year, because when I first read this book, I was in high school and I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was bad, but I didn't really love it. Reread it and fell madly in love with it. It's now probably one of my favorite books of all time. It's The Awakening by Kate Chopin. And this is a book, it's a classic set in the 1800s. It's a book about a woman who basically is awakened to her own desires, her own sexual desires, her own desires for her life, things that she's hobbies and things that she's interested in, because most of her life she's just sort of done what is expected of her and what people have told her to do, and she's never really thought about the things that she wants. And then it sort of looks at like, well, now what happens to a woman when they become awakened to these things in this sort of society, and they do realize what they want, how do they live, especially when so many of the things that they want are against societal norms or societal expectations. I just absolutely love this book. Just the existential crisis that's kind of going on in the character, I could just really relate to. And I just think that it's beautifully written and the characters are really interesting. And I think that you do need to be a certain age to really truly understand it. Like, I think that that's a you have to have like lived the life a little bit to really get it. But it's definitely one of my favorite books that I read last year, and probably one of my favorite books of all time. So I highly suggest it, especially if you're interested in getting into classics, because it's really short. It's like 116 pages. So you don't even have to give that great of an investment. The next book that I read is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This book to me was one of the just most interesting, repulsive, intriguing, entertaining, confusing reads that I did last year. It was just so many things. I think that the book is beautifully written. I think that the book reveals a lot about humanity and about ourselves and how we view the world. Yeah, it's hard to stomach. I will put it out there. And I think I still really want to. I scripted a review that I would like to film. I feel a little hard. It's going to be a little hard to do it because now I am like several months out from having read it. But I do probably want to film a separate video about it because I do want to try and encourage some people. There's definitely some people who will not be able to handle it and not be able to deal with it, and that's perfectly all right. But there are some people who I think are afraid of it for reasons why I was afraid of it that I think are actually unwarranted. So I think I'm going to try and film a video specifically about Lolita, but I highly recommend it if you're just into like if you really want to read like some really great sentences, or if you just want to sort of explore the underbelly of an issue. Because one thing about the book that I want to put out there is that the book is not a defense of Humpert as a pedophile. It's not a defense of like, let's talk about why he is and why he is this way and defend his actions. He is made very clear from beginning to end that he is a monster, but he is also a human being. And what does that say about us as humans? What does that say about us? He is a monster. He has done horrific things, but he is also extremely charming, extremely smart, and and unassuming, and is someone who someone who you could imagine trusting and becoming close to. And what does that say about the world? I don't know. I definitely want to have so many things to say about that book, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy that I read it in 2016. And then the last books that I want to talk about are I'm putting them all in one category, and that is the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante. I read My Brilliant Friend in 2015, and then I finished the rest of the series in 2016. So that's the story of A New Name, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, and the story of The Lost Child. And I just love these books. It's a book about two women who grew up in a poor neighborhood in Naples, and one of them is given the opportunity to be educated and the other one is not, and it sort of looks at the consequences of that choice, how their lives differ because of that, and how they're both sort of trying to make the most of their life in their world because of the using those ideas. And it's this idea that you never ever completely shed where you came from. One of the things that I really like about the series is that the neighborhood that these girls come from is as much a character as they are. The people that populate the neighborhood are people that stick with them as they grow older and as they continue, and they never can fully escape it, which is something that I actually really believe. I do believe that where you come from has a huge influence on who you become, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's something that you do because of it or despite of it. I do think that it influences who you are, and I really love that, and I just came to love all of the characters and all of the people. The friendship is complicated. It's necessary for them. They need each other to be able to motivate each other to continue through life, but they are also sometimes very envious of each other, and they can be very toxic towards one another at times. It's just so interesting. I find myself relating a lot to the character of Elena because she's someone who goes into higher education, as someone who comes from a family of people who did not do higher ed a lot. I come from a community of people who do not go. Very few of the people that I grew up with went to college at all. Better yet, went and got master's degrees. And so it's sort of what that experience is like, kind of entering into a world that doesn't feel like it was made for you. A world that is so different from the world that you come from. And yeah, I really, really love those books and highly suggest them. If you have not caught Ferrante Fever yet, you need to get on it. And so those are my 8 favorite books from the whole year. And then I have 2 honorable mentions. The first one is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. I can't necessarily say that this book was one of my favorite books that I read last year, but it's definitely one of the most important. In it, Alexander basically sets up an argument that she believes that our current system of mass incarceration, which was fueled by the war on drugs, is basically another racial caste system similar to Jim Crow. And she sets up an argument, very well laid out, very well backed up, and I feel like even if you don't complete, again, I think I said this in my inbox outbox video when I mentioned this. I don't think that you can read the book, read The New Jim Crow, and not come to the conclusion that there is something wrong with our justice system, that our justice system is in some ways unfairly biased towards brown and black people. Like, I don't know how you could pay attention to how you could look at that and not come to that conclusion. Maybe you won't come to the conclusion that it's a racial caste system, but I think that you'll definitely see that there are some issues with the way that our country deals with drug violations. And so I think it's just a really important book to read, to just sort of be aware of what's going on in that situation. Another book, the second honorable mention, is A Dog's Ransom by Patricia Highsmith. So I originally read this book as part of the Underhyped Reads Readathon, or at least I put it on my TBR for that. But I ended up not finishing it around that time period because it was, even though it's really short, it was a really, really slow read and it didn't really fit a readathon. But I did finish it later on. And when I first finished it, I thought, oh, that was okay. I wasn't that impressed by it. But then I was looking at my little wrap up for 2016 on Goodreads, where they show you like your year in books, and it told me that A Dog's Ransom was my least popular book that I had read, as in it was the book that I read that had the fewest ratings. And I realized that I had read it in probably like March or April, and it was December, and I was surprised by how much of the story I retained and by how much of the feelings and the things that the story brought up in me was still lingered, and how much of it I could recall, and how it still managed to bring a rise out of me. And so it made me realize that I actually really liked this book. It is a book that I actually might want to revisit again. Basically, it's a book that is exactly like what it sounds like. A well-to-do man's poodle is abducted and held for ransom, and a police officer gets involved to help him recover his dog, and we sort of get to see the story from these 3 people's point of views: the person whose dog is kidnapped, the person who kidnaps the dog, and the police officer. And it's just sort of a look at the way I feel like it looks at the way in which people can become bad, really. Because we have, particularly when we're looking at the police officer, because we have this police officer character named Paul who starts off this story. He's very noble. He has all these kind of like high ideals about right and wrong. And slowly we watch that sort of disintegrate as he tries to investigate this crime. And then we have this other character, the person who kidnaps the dog, who is just a horrific kind of villainous sort of character. Really, he's just really bitter and angry, and he has just such disdain and hatred and envy for other people, which causes him to do these horrible things. And it sort of sees how these two, when these different types of personalities come together, how they can cause some sort of like negative effects on people. I feel like we're kind of sort of watching the disintegration of the police officer Paul as he is dealing with this very malignant, is that the word I want to look for? I'm gonna use that word for now. I don't think that's the word I mean though, but it's very kind of malignant. I don't know what word I'm using for. This very kind of like, I don't want to use evil though either. Bad character. This character, morally corrupt character, as he's having these dealings with this character, how it starts to affect who he is as a person. So I think it's just like a really interesting study of humanity in this novel. So those are my favorite reads from 2016. I've already seen like the almost everybody else's 2016 videos, but if you don't make videos and you have books that you read in 2016 and you want to tell me about, please comment below, especially if your reads are things that you think I would be interested in based on what you just saw in my video. And like we're like 2-3 weeks into 2017, so I'm happy to sort of be able to push 2016 into the past. And I'm gonna probably do a 2017 goals book probably when I have some sunlight and don't have to use this rear facing camera, because this mug is a freaking nuisance. But I hope that this video looks okay. Hope the lighting is fine. I know that I like held one of the books. I held the Year of Magical Thinking out of frame, which I'm just deciding not to hold up the books in this video at all. I'm just going to put a picture up because I just can't get locations right. But let me stop rambling. You guys have been probably listening to me way too long. Have a great night. Talk to you soon.